Welcome everyone to this episode of Essay Reviews, where we are looking at AI strategy for a new American president by Herbie Bradley. Herbie has previously worked with the AI Safety Institute on AI policy within the UK scene and was one of the first co-organizers of the AI Safety Summit. This is the first blog post in a series on articulating the pathways that we might see with AI and is one of his attempts at sort of showing people where we might be heading. And of course, as he mentions here as well, we are active participants in this future, and I'll echo his message that you, of course, as an individual, can make a really, really big difference because there are so few people working on it. With that out of the way, let's jump straight into the article. His main question is, what can we expect from the next US government's AI policy, and what it might imply for the future of development and deployment of this most advanced AI systems that we see come out of the US? The main message he explains here is that the strategic landscape indeed has dramatically shifted. And this comes even though many outside of Washington, D.C., outside of legislation in the US, underestimate and underrate how much of an effect this election has had on AI policy. On my own side, I expected the actual AI safety focus to be somewhat neutral across all the different changes, but expected very big changes to the administration's approach to AI. And specifically, he mentions here an increased focus on four different things here. One is China as an adversary, so this race for the US to be number one in AI. Then this sort of resulting in these focuses on boosting domestic energy production. So we've already seen Microsoft having to restart a nuclear power plant to get power for the next data center. They are also talking about onshoring more semiconductor manufacturing. We've seen TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturer, open new factories in the US that are already running and already running well. And they're probably going to continue export controls on chips. This is in the backdrop of a bunch of legislation that banned the export of the state-of-the-art, the most modern chips to China. China has since been developing their own chip manufacturing and have actually been very, very successful at it to a surprising degree. And then the fifth here, building out AI application for national security. This is one we'll see a little bit of, and he also mentions here that it's one that people are underappreciating. Specifically, we're going to see AI probably increasingly as a defense technology, as a technology used within the defense, the military-industrial complex, or whatever you want to call it, the defense complex in the US, and that securing frontier AIs will be really, really important. So we've already seen a lot of, and I think in San Francisco, we talk a little bit about this effect where OpenAI probably has had their model stolen because they didn't have proper security in place. But we'll probably see that the US takes it as a strategic effort and a strategic goal to make sure no one can steal from the national AI labs. And this might mean that you'll have tight security partnerships between the US government and the AI labs themselves. Then there is a potential conflict as well in the new administration that needs a little bit of strategic focus, which is this dichotomy, or this difference between tighter government control and open source industrialization and more access to AI, boosting the economy and financial arguments and so on. So it'll probably be viewed as a strongly dual use technology. And it's generally been seen before this as a non-military application and non-military technology, but we're really seeing this shift happen now. And I don't know how to feel about it. In general, we've all been relatively hesitant to get the military involved, but it was inevitable that it would happen here, and we'll really have to hope that that actors within that space are seeing it with their eyes open to one degree or another. I think we've already seen some people within the Department of Defense, for example, take quite a clear view upon the risks that AI actually poses to the US and to the world in general. Then there are some guesses for where Trump's AI relevant policies will move. So he mentions boosting AI data center growth, having more AI national security, continue export controls, and potentially on model weights themselves. So ensuring that the models are hosted on American data centers. Then having tighter export controls on semiconductors themselves, and improving the cybersecurity of labs development and deployment. Then there is one in terms of the policy framework itself, the governance framework within the US, where we see specific states take action to make various bills where apparently, and I didn't know, but Texas has had a relatively insane patchwork to sort of deal with the development of AI on the legislative side, and maybe we'll see that the federal government actually tries to create legislation that covers all the states. This basically means that it would be the same as in Europe if Brussels creates an EU-wide legislation, such as the EU AI Act, and that might happen in the US as well. Then he makes a little ins and outs list, which I love myself. This is in the tradition of sort of saying what's in the new year and what's out from the last year. And specifically, he expects, and this is very interesting, he expects that we'll have much more work on AI security, so maybe even control agenda in there, ensuring robust and reliable AI for defense applications, and forecasting economic impacts of AI agents themselves. And then he expects that some of the foremost approaches to AI safety right now will be out. So one is evaluations of bias and what some would call alignment evals here, pre-deployment third-party safety evaluations. So this is stuff like what Meter is doing, at least in a legislative way. Safety cases, so having responsible scaling policies and so on. Adversarial robustness and jailbreaking, which is generally an application level question and something that we've seen in the context of singular systems and not in agents. Risk assessment frameworks, again, a thing that you can only do when the technology isn't changing rapidly every day, and mechanistic interpretability. And it looks like he'll expand on these, but I'm pretty excited to see why this is the case. Mechanistic interpretability, I think the same as well, because we'll just see AI agents and, our approaches to AI safety technical work having to one degree or another not been enough to control it yet. And that alignment by default worked, and that agents will actually be able to act in the real world to a level where we are just not able to monitor them to an effective degree. Of course, there's a lot of great technical work that is involved in AI security, ensuring robust and reliable AI, and forecasting economic impacts, especially of AI agents. So definitely not technical work isn't out, but new technical work is very in. An interesting background here on what happens. So that was the summary. An interesting background on why these things might happen and how they're going to happen is that Biden created the AI executive order. And Trump will probably repeal it. He's mentioned he wants to repeal it and will probably replace it with a new Trump executive order. And we don't know what will be in there, but according to the policies in the Biden executive order, we'll probably see some things continue and a few things change a little bit. And then there's, of course, Elon Musk. And I think many people have seen Elon Musk on social media or very close to Trump or meddling in European elections. He is a bit of a wild card these days. And of course, he has for, I think, more than 20 years now, talked about the risks of AI and how AI could be the end of humanity. He has 100% by 2030 timelines or something like this. So 100% chance of general intelligence being developed artificially by 2030. And in some interviews, he's hinted at the fact that this is the only election that will really matter for AI safety. Unfortunately, it looks like he has to one degree or another, he gets caught on very specific issues, and his mandate doesn't necessarily extend to AI yet. This is beyond Herbie's post here, but Herbie talks about how Elon's familiarity with the AI space and influence on Trump administration hopefully will help shape the government's policy. So these other comments I'll mention again. These are my own comments. Now, one very, very interesting institution in the US is the US AI Safety Institute. This was one of the first AI safety institutes in the world after the UK AI Safety Institute, and is really designed to do this pre-deployment testing. So testing before big AI labs release their AIs to make sure they don't create catastrophic risks. And that's what he mentions here as well, their main activity being very aligned with Biden's national security memorandum. Now, what we'll probably see is that it'll be very advantageous for them to focus more on AI for national security. And they have some very well-known experts from the field. So some of the early ones who worked on the core safety techniques we use today are, for example, at the US AI Safety Institute working there. So So hopefully they will be moved to another place or another direction where they can really make sure that AI safety is a core focus. A potential thing that may happen, and I didn't know this myself, is that U.S. AI Safety Institute may be moved outside of the Commerce Department, or whatever you want to call it, the Department of Commerce, and to the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy, interestingly, has a lot of ownership and control of the national labs, which is a big sort of consortium or network of labs in the US run by the government. It's a lot of the biggest development on infrastructure level projects and on a lot of different aspects that are really relevant for how society develops. He also mentions here that they have significant computing expertise in the labs, which they do, and they also run some of these biggest compute clusters in the US already, the ones that are hidden and the ones that are not. The US AI Safety Institute is also engaged in various international agreements, for example, the AI Safety Summits, and we may see them actually step a little bit away from the international scene because there are some issues with being involved to such a high degree with foreign regulatory bodies such as the EU AI Office. For other international collaborations, we recently actually saw Joe Biden shake hands with Xi Jinping on avoiding autonomous weapon systems, and we'll see how well that goes. But other examples include the Hiroshima process, the OECD AI principles, the UN AI advisory body and report, the AI safety summits in the UK and Seoul, and the international network of AI safety institutes. So there's quite a bit going on. Most of these are soft commitments, but they are indeed joint statements. So statements that we should take these problems seriously with AI. And when we have these statements, we can always refer to them and really use them to say, hey, we agreed to this. Okay, AI lab, please give us access to your model so we can do this regulation properly. Unfortunately, there is nothing binding here, and I've previously been working on some climate change work, and in climate change, we've often talked about how the recent agreements, such as the Paris Agreement and the Copenhagen Agreement, that they were not actually imposing any binding agreements on countries. So compared to some of the ones from the last millennium, where we had agreements that actually were binding on governments' reduction of pollution. We haven't seen that since then. And hopefully AI safety doesn't go the same direction, but we actually see some binding stuff down the line. Of course, the field is moving so rapidly that it's really, really hard to say what's the right thing to make binding right now. So I also wouldn't advocate for anything there. From an America First perspective, as Herbie says, the motivation to engage significantly in international frontier AI governance seems quite weak, and we'll probably just see the US do it locally. This international work of AI safety institutes that I talked about is chaired by the US AI Safety Institute, with UK AI Safety Institute as the secretariat and Singapore AI Safety Institute as the vice chair. They are really the three most prominent ones. The UK is the biggest one, US is the second biggest one, and then there's a few others. Herbie, for example, mentions that there are ones in Japan and even Kenya and so on, where it doesn't necessarily make sense to synchronize all of the AI legislation across these countries because they are in such different situations. Of course, the international coordination part has been looked at a lot from an AI governance and AI safety perspective, because we need to make sure that no one develops dangerous artificial intelligence. So we'll see where this one goes, but it doesn't look like the US will really be working to make that international. Structurally, of course, this is to some degree fine because all AI labs are based in the US, and we don't necessarily want international work to hamper the regulation within the US, right? So in that sense, it might be good, it might be bad. So they are the natural person or the natural organization to do this. The interesting part about the US AI Safety Institute's influence comes where the Biden White House actually proactively nudged other parts of the government to work and collaborate with the US AI Safety Institute when they wanted to work with frontier AI. This is something I didn't know myself, but it's very interesting to see, and let's hope that this continues from some of the White House staff. But indeed, we'll likely see less international collaboration for safety testing on frontier models. Now, this is where he mentions the point about international AI safety institutes and whether they'll be impactful. We do have DeepSeek from China, one of the companies that has done extremely well on developing new AI systems, or extremely capable AI systems. And we also have DeepMind. So DeepMind is in the UK and DeepSeek is in China. These are probably the main actors within this space that we can talk about developing artificial general intelligence. While in the US, you just have, you know, the seven top tech companies in the world in terms of valuation, and they're investing a lot. So I think Microsoft is recently mentioned they were going to invest $80 billion, and there's just very, very few actors in the world that can do that besides governments. And he mentions here as well that some jurisdictions rely purely on the desire of foreign tech companies. So, for example, Microsoft, to deploy and profit from deploying technology there. This is very relevant in a European context, and of course, it's a little bit sad, but it's what I would term a subject nation. I was in a panel debate talking about this in the Southeast Asian context, where and actually also in Copenhagen in a European context, that we really are like a subject continent, or whatever you want to call it, a place where the technology is not being developed for various reasons. And when I'm in San Francisco, like 50% of the people there are like you know, all right, not 50%, but a large proportion of people there are indeed from Europe, and are working on these quite pivotal things. Surprisingly, like a surprising amount from Australia as well. I was surprised. Now, one thing that Europe usually mentions is the Brussels effect. It's this book that creates the term Brussels effect, and that book should probably just have been a blog post, but it's about how Brussels makes a new legislation, and this sort of pushes the whole world to change things because the whole world wants to sell stuff in Europe. And this is becoming a little bit less true because of the development timelines of AI, where it takes too long to sort of adhere to European legislation. Yeah. And this is where he mentions that, okay, to what extent is it really important to push an international consensus compared to rapidly shifting situations and rapidly shifting technological development within the AI development context. Now, Herbie then mentions that a hot topic within the space will be what he calls securitization of AI. And I'll quickly mention that securitization is the pooling of assets to sell securities in finance, and is used here in a completely different context where it's about securing AI in a variety of ways. And this, he defines it as work to improve the cyber and information security of frontier AI training and deployment. So you can think of it as OpenAI has a model, they want to make sure it doesn't get stolen. That's a really big thing here. Now, this is also something that other very recent documents and big reports have talked about and have emphasized a lot. And it's something where some observers have noted that this strategy may not be as effective in the context where China and open source are very close behind, to even closed labs, industry labs like DeepMind, so Google's DeepMind there. And yeah, we'll see what really comes out of this. But the personal intuition for Herbie is that it's still very valuable to pursue and make sure that it doesn't get released too quickly into society before we know the risks it may have. Now, he also mentions that we'll probably see fine-tunes of leading frontier large language models for defense applications, which will likely be the way that frontier AI labs will actually secure themselves as well in the short term. It's something I know Anthropic is working a lot on, so they have a really large security staff, which they are also utilizing to improve their securitization in this context. And this is like, yeah, it's somewhat in the context of this increase in AI for defense, where OpenAI has partnered with Anduril, a defense company. Palantir has partnered with Anthropic and AWS. And OpenAI has a recent board appointee who is an ex-NSA general. So NSA is, of course, the one of the intelligence institutes of the US, and the ones that have been sort of monitoring all information in the world for the last 40 years or something like that. And it's interesting to see that they're appointed to the board there. This is all a tighter and tighter integration, and something that we're indeed seeing pan out in the way you would expect for such an important technology. Now, an interesting point here, and one that I've also seen and have thought quite unfortunate, is the effect that defense tech, so military technology, is finally cool in SF. Where he was at a Palantir party apparently, where they talked about the path from Stanford student to crypto founder to AI and then to defense technology as a pipeline for talent in California. And this is a very interesting path. And I do think defense is very important, and ensuring a global, like a stable global society. But of course, in the context of AI safety, yeah, it'll be interesting what the results are. What it concretely means with public-private partnerships is that you might see government cyber and info security experts put into labs. So that has quite a big effect in terms of who would use the services and so on. Now for a little bit of a more deep dive into energy, semiconductors, and compute. So general chips and how to run them. We'll probably see more of this energy supply, onshoring chip manufacturing, building more compute capacity, with a big risk of the US actually severely underbuilding its power supply. So the fact that every other industry also needs more power, which includes electric vehicles, a lot of different factories that are very highly energy demanding, and now also AI, where you're restarting whole nuclear power plants to actually run power to these data centers. So there's a big risk of severely underbuilding. It looks like most industrial policy actually recognizes this from both sides of the aisle, and Trump will probably continue that. The CHIPS Act itself subsidizes domestic chip manufacturing, and it's received criticisms from some Republicans, but Trump will probably continue boosting US chip production either way. Now, as mentioned when I talked about Elon here, DOGE, so the Department of Government Efficiency, which is an advisory body chaired by Elon, it doesn't look to have direct impact on AI by default, but we'll see what comes out of it either way. Awesome. I hope you enjoyed this little look at this great first post by Herbie. I'm really excited to see what else will come out of it, and I know that I'll be liking this one, and then potentially seeing it out there, earning its fair due as it's being read by people who can make these sort of decisions. And I'll probably again explain that you as an individual person can of course make a lot of progress in AI safety and ensure that that things go well here. So yeah, as Herbie Bradley says, it's a place where you having a better understanding of the pathways into the future might be really valuable. So I of course encourage you to check out in the description Herbie's post and AI pathways, and then subscribe. Otherwise, I will see you in the next review.